Ghostbusters old and new are back and facing their greatest threat. But does bustin' still make the audience feel good? Find out when Johnnie Torch reviews Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Welcome back to another Johnnie Torch Reviews. And today, this is the much anticipated sequel to Ghostbusters Afterlife. This was my most anticipated movie of the year. And of course, following up on Ghostbusters Afterlife, which was the highly anticipated sequel that was like 30 years in the making. And now Ghostbusters is sort of settled in as a legitimate franchise. Now, sort of like with a lot of franchises, there was the dormant years where not much was going on. The animated series, of course, kind of helped carry on post the first Ghostbusters film, and of course that bridged a very long gap, at least all things considered, from a hit movie not getting a sequel until nearly 5 years later, till Ghostbusters 2. Then after Ghostbusters 2, the animated series was on its last legs. The films, it seemed like the film series was not going to ever get a third film in the franchise to make it a trilogy. Eventually, a video game, a very popular video game with the voices of the original cast, was created, and bringing us until the unfortunate passing of Harold Ramis to Ghostbusters Afterlife. And with Ghostbusters Afterlife really invigorating or reinvigorating the franchise as sort of a family comedy, unlike sort of the, madcap kind of screwball comedy that the original Ghostbusters films were, it did seem like new life was in the veins for Ghostbusters, and they weren't going to be giving up the ghost anytime soon. Finally, we have, and of course, I'm purposely forgetting Ghostbusters 16, which I did not see, and I still did not see. I really don't really have any desire to see it. But apart from that blip, the Ghostbuster legacy seemed to be on the right track now, and it leads us to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which seems to promise the beginning of new adventures. Sony has set up a division called Ghostbusters Corp or something like that, and the intention is that Ghostbusters is going to be around for a while. There's, no fear of it going away again anytime soon, that the OG Ghostbusters will be on hand for these movies and projects to sort of, at least lend a temporary familiar face to keep the franchise on track. And it's always going to be the heart and soul of the Ghostbusters being, Murray, Aykroyd, Hudson, and of course, the unfortunately departed Harold Ramis. So, with that little bit of a backdrop here, where do we go with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire? Now, again, just to give sort of like the Cliff Notes version for people who don't want to hear the spoilers, I was really looking forward to this film, and judging by the trailers, I thought this really was going to be the best of the Ghostbusters films. I thought it could possibly even top the original Ghostbusters, which I know was an overly lofty expectation. Maybe my expectations were a little too high for this film. It hasn't been getting great ratings, reviews, and so forth. Not too many people are rating it very highly. And honestly, it really is probably mid. I was possibly expecting much too much from it, but it seems like it is overly long, and it I think everything you've heard everybody complain about it. I know I'm not the first at this point to have reviewed this film, so I'm sure everything I'm saying is not going to be taken as any kind of shock to anybody. But Uh, the plot lines are very many, and the characters are very many. A lot of things are sort of like overbaked. There's a lot of preparation for the last act, and the last act seems to go by like that. And we had so much setup over the course of the first two acts of this film, it couldn't help but sort of fall in the last act. And the last act is the best act, but it kind of feels like we tried so hard to make a story to get here that we really didn't have any fun with the resolution. I think they overthought the concept of what makes a Ghostbusters plot. If you go back and think of the original Ghostbusters films, you have, basically Egon and Ray sort of spitballing what's going on with Gozer. Pretty much ditto for Vigo in Ghostbusters 2. There really wasn't like this large buildup. And this the ghost boss here, I can't remember his name right now, Graxon or something like that, has so much buildup, and he is kind of an imposing looking figure by the end of the film. But so much time was spent trying to give an actual story, and I mean, it felt like they really built up too much backstory for this character, so that when the time came and we were going to deal with him, there really wasn't much left to do. And it kind of felt like it was overbaked, and that was my main problem with the film. The other problem being that the OG Ghostbusters really didn't do that much. This was my main complaint for this film. I feel like this was what I was afraid of was going to happen in the first Ghostbusters uh, of the new generation here, Ghostbusters Afterlife. I was kind of afraid that the OG Ghostbusters were only going to be a gratuitous cameo that was like, oh yeah, here's the actors, they're happy, and they're getting to put on the uniforms again, they're getting a paycheck and they're going home, not really accomplishing much in the story. Actually, in Ghostbusters Afterlife, they felt like they accomplished a lot more than that. I felt like they were an integral part of the resolution of that film. They felt a lot more on point. They felt more like the original characters because they were kind of picking up where they left off 30-ish years ago. And in this one, it doesn't really feel so much like they're stepping back into the role of protectors of New York, if not all civilization. It feels more like the obligatory cameos. I'll get into that a little more in a few minutes, but yeah, so I'm gonna have to say this one was pretty mid. I think again, the problem is I really want people to see this film because it's not bad. I think if people stay away, this will be a franchise killer, and that's what I'm afraid of. But it's not a bad film. The way I described it on Twitter is I wish there was a proper term where you could describe a movie that fails to live up to its potential. Now, the first film I think of in that category was Creed 2. Now, Creed 2 on paper looked like it was going to be a blockbuster. It had a great concept. Creed is going to take on his father's killer in the ring. Rocky is, hesitant to train him, knowing what happened to his father's best friend. You have the confrontation between Creed's mother and Rocky, who hasn't seen her since the funeral for Apollo in the mid 80s. You have Drago wanting his revenge because his family was ostracized. And you get only like glimmers of that in the film. They really don't take full advantage of all that stuff that would have made it a 5-star movie. And it feels like it's the same thing here. It feels like we kind of toil in the weeds and we really don't get to let's see Ray use that great knowledge of his of the weirdness that nobody else knows. Let's see Winston really go to town and show all the bells and whistles of the Ghostbusters project. Let's see Peter, use that razor sharp wit. He has a couple of great lines, two or three, but I feel like it was all on the fringes, and we could have brought that out. And there was a lot of time wasted more explaining the plot, more explaining the story. So I'm going to have to say this one was mid. And like I said, I probably would say you could wait for DVD or whatever for this, but I really think that you should give it a shot, if for no other reason that it'll probably give the franchise one more chance of coming back. Because I think if this film fails, I think they're going to go back to, just doing video games and whatever. And I really like seeing the Ghostbusters on the big screen every couple of years. But does this one hit it out of the park? No, I don't think so. I'll give it the rating later, but it's suffice to say mid. All right, so we're going to get right into the nuts and bolts of the film now. So if you didn't want to hear the spoilers and you just wanted to hear the off the top of my head Cliff Notes version, then that's it. So here we go with the spoiler section. And basically, they bring back William Athison, I think is his name, who plays Walter Peck. And so the film starts with Walter Peck being the mayor. And this, again, sets up some really interesting dynamics for the Ghostbusters because he is an old enemy of the Ghostbusters. And unfortunately, they don't really lay any groundwork there. We don't really know what happened from him being sort of an embarrassment. The last time we see him, the mayor says, "Get this man out of here." And he gets the Stay Puft residue dumped on him. And he kind of went from being this, downcast character who is just, the world is laughing at him. And now somehow he's the mayor. And we don't really find out how that happens. We don't really get any weighty scenes of him describing his animosity. It just seems like he kind of just picks up where he left off in Ghostbusters, the original film. Basically, he's got an axe to grind with the Ghostbusters. He doesn't like them, and he wants to make life as difficult for them as possible. Now, we all know what happened to the first film, but it feels like there's such a great divide from the first film now to the fourth that I would have liked to have had a scene where he's talking to someone or maybe even talking to the Ghostbusters and being frank about, his feelings and how it took him a lot to get where he is now as the mayor when he was working for the Environmental Protection Agency back in the 80s. So again, I kind of feel like this is where, again, I'm comparing it to Creed 2 and saying you could have really delved into the meat of this plot, of this concept, but instead we really bypass a lot of it that we could have gotten really deep into the meat and potatoes of. They sidetrack, they bench Phoebe, who is, of course, for lack of a better term, the star of the picture. I mean, she was sort of the star the first time, McKenna Grace. And again, she's very good here. I don't feel like she missed a step picking up this role. They kind of try to evolve her a little bit, I think. They started the film with her telling like the really unfunny joke. And, it feels like they wanted us to have that tether to the original. I keep saying original film, but the original film in this soft reboot. And but they kind of make her grow beyond that, which I think was a good idea, which was a good move. And since she's sidetracked now, because she's 15 and she's not legally old enough to be a Ghostbuster, which again, it's kind of left in the margins of what kind of legality they have to be Ghostbusters. It's something that sort of like is implied that because they saved the world, they are allowed to keep doing this, but it's kind of with the stink eye from the mayor and the police and stuff like that. And that's interesting. We get the whole family back. Paul Rudd is back, and he's always a pleasure to watch. He's really funny in this, and he's fun. Carrie Coon as the mother. Again, I think she's really underrated in these films. I've always enjoyed her as a character in both these movies because she's at one point the outsider in the previous film, where she's kind of trying to get on page with what everybody else seems to already know about being a Ghostbuster and what the Ghostbusters stand for. And then she's, like in this film, also been able to grow a little bit into, she's the head of the family now and she knows what to do. And she's trying to apply that to the family / team at large. And again, I think that she plays that role very well, and that it could have been it's kind of a cumbersome role to have, but she ends up doing it very well. Trevor is back. What's the actor's name? I can't remember. But yeah, and if anything, I think the rest of the cast from the original, from the Afterlife, is it's sort of they get pushed to the margins. This is kind of what happens. Um, he has some very funny scenes in this film because I think he was really I think he was sort of the comedy of the first one. But in this one, he has a scene, and they brought back Slimer, which is something that I was really looking forward to because I thought he was sorely missing in Afterlife. But they bring back Slimer, and there's sort of this, humorous subplot for a couple of minutes that you know Trevor is trying to catch Slimer, and he's using the trap and baiting the trap with like Cheez-Its and stuff. It's really funny, and so it was fun to see Slimer back. And then of course, Lucky is back. She's working for the sort of the underground base that Winston has created for the Ghostbusters, and Podcast is back, and he's like spending his summer with Ray. And again, they really don't spend a lot of time trying to obsess over how do these kids go from the Midwest or wherever they were over to New York to suddenly become on call members of the team. And it I think it worked. I didn't want them to really obsess over it. Again, with Trevor and Lucky's relationship, I know there was sort of like a boyfriend girlfriend relationship in the works between them two, and they mercifully don't go there. They basically have, oh, it's so good to see you again, and sort of a platonic hug, and then they just carry on with the movie. I was like, I hope this is not going to be, Romeo and Juliet part two. But they wisely seem to stay away from that and just made this a team movie. Uh, I kind of feel like of all of them, if I had to say who got the short end of the stick, I really wanted more from Podcast because he was sort of the Ray of the last film. He was sort of what, the relationship between um, Phoebe and Podcast is sort of the relationship between Egon and Ray. And I don't think we got that much of it in this movie, and I missed some of that. He still has a couple of good scenes, and they do kind of utilize him, but I was really missing sort of that rapport that they had in the last film. And so, if anything, I would have tried to beef up Podcast's role a little bit more. And again, like I said, I think the plot of this film gets in the way. Um, let's talk about the original Ghostbusters again. They're back in it. And like I said, they don't really feel like they have as much to do here. The only positive I have to say about the original Ghostbusters being in this film is that I know that Dan Aykroyd is true blue, dedicated to the Ghostbusters brand. He loves this franchise. He'll do anything to keep this franchise going. He loves being in this franchise. And I kind of felt badly that he wasn't really in Afterlife that much as sort of a through line, having, one of the OG characters tethered to the new films. I think Ray is, of course, the common sense choice. And he is in this movie the way I thought he should have been in the last movie. In the last movie, they kind of played on the trope of, oh, I'm done with that, and there's no ghost busting anymore, and so forth. But this kind of felt more to me like the way Ray would be, the way he would act. The conceit of the first film sort of negated that he have that kind of outlook. But in this film, he literally tells Winston, this is what I want to do with my life. He's not giving up the Ray's occult books or whatever. And again, if there was anything that was kind of uncharacteristic, it kind of felt like Winston kind of is like hands off of Ghostbusters. He's like the money, and of course he's the everyman. He's not really the scientist, so he doesn't go into it looking at things as a scientist or as an occult expert. He goes into it just as, we need equipment, and this is what we're going to do. So his only really main scene in this film is, he has like two. One is where he comes in and he does the showing of the new base, where they kind of have an underground base to monitor and study the ghosts that they've captured. And then there's the scene, like I said, where he's sort of telling Ray, we're in our golden years now. We really should retire. We really should step aside and, not be going around chasing ghosts anymore. And I have a feeling like that is the problem with this film that I think a lot of, at least me, I was afraid the first film was going to be like that, Afterlife. I thought it was going to be, well, like I said, Ray was going to be like, that's over for us now or whatever. But you got you still got that spark, that joy of seeing the guys get together again in their uniforms. They're taking care of business. And here it felt more like the actual passing of the torch, where it's like, all right, they're honestly looking a little bit older now. They know they don't really have the mobility or the years to keep, up the pretense of the energetic superstars of years ago. And I wish that they wouldn't have sort of highlighted that. And I think this scene is what does that. This scene sort of, it makes your brain think of it. It makes you think of, well, like they're old now and I shouldn't expect too much of them. And I feel like that is the kiss of death when you're doing one of these reunions, bringing back the old cast and this and that. That was kind of like, when you were doing like, trying to think, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they started the movie with those like old jokes because they wanted to get it out of your way and sort of not look at Indy being that old, but you got to admit that now he's older. I think, that's the thing. There's a way of doing it without making it feel like, all right, we're officially saying they're old now. Maybe that was just the way it struck me, but that kind of, I think, that cast a pale over the film a little bit for me. Bill Murray is back, and again, sadly, they don't really have a whole lot to do. Bill Murray, of course, you only got him for like 4 days. I mean, he, out of the goodness of his heart, I guess, has decided he's going to take part in these Ghostbusters films after a long time. And they literally only have him for 4 days, I think. He had one day where he does a clip like in the middle of the movie, a little brief scene. And then he was on set for maybe 2 or 3 days after that to just do the, reaction shots, make a couple of jokes, and then, run to the back of the firehouse. Not a whole lot was required of him. He had a couple of funny jokes. And again, that's kind of what I'm missing in this film is there wasn't a lot of interplay. You had that like one scene between Ray and Winston. Then you have Peter here in this scene near the end. And, he sort of connects with Ray for a joke or two. He acknowledges Janine. Of course, Annie Potts is back as Janine. But he doesn't really get a whole lot to do. There's not a lot of, there's definitely no heavy lifting for him this time. Of course, Janine's back, Annie Potts is back. And again, with her, it's another situation where I don't remember. I'm not sure, but I don't think she even ever answered the phone for the Ghostbusters. I think that's in the trailer. I don't think that's actually in the movie. So she comes in and she says like one line or two and she's gone again. And it's kind of that same thing that the original Ghostbusters don't really get that sort of recognition for what they do. And I missed that. That was kind of my biggest problem with the film. The biggest laugh in the film was, I think, when Venkman goes in and he opens up the power box and he's got like probably a 10-year-old bottle of bourbon or something in the power box, and he's like, anybody want some liquid courage? That felt like Peter Venkman. That kind of goes back to like the beginning of the original Ghostbusters. But and then there's a lot of nods back to the original film, of course. I'm sure everybody's seen in the trailer. There's the librarian ghost. They go back to the library. They actually get the librarian, the head librarian, or whatever you call that guy, back from the first movie. And that was cool to see him. And he's like, Ray is like, he's an old friend of mine. And the guy's like, no, don't come in here again. That was pretty funny. We got a sort of a pointless cameo by Patton Oswalt. I'm not a fan of his particularly, but I do think he's good in what he does when he does it. Like, for instance, when he was in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I really liked him as a character in that show. So, I mean, I just go by the performance. In this, he wasn't really necessary. I don't think he brought anything out. He wasn't particularly, like, needed or funny in this role. It was just sort of like, let's have sort of a name, do the plot exposition, do the plot dump, because we had to explain how the the Frozen Empire ghost does what he does in his history and this and that. And again, in the original two films, Dan Aykroyd does this in like two sentences, or you know, Ray and Egon maybe had two sentences each, and they describe Vigo and Gozer, and you know, I don't really think it was like that necessary to build that much backstory into this. Another thing that was interesting, they brought in a character, and I didn't know that he was going to have as much to do in this film, but Kumail Nahaji, I think that's how you pronounce his name. I'm not sure. He plays Nadim, which I like Kumail Nahaji. I think he's a good comedian. I think he's funny in these little roles when you see him pop up and stuff. He was clearly the best thing in the Eternals, and he never came back at the end of that movie, which was disappointing. Um, and he was also in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which again, a lot of people didn't like that show. I thought it was good, and I thought that he was actually pretty good in that role as sort of a Jedi huckster, that he was trying to pass himself off as a Jedi. So I mean, I've seen him in a couple of things at this point. I like him as a comedian. So I was welcoming him into the film, but again, I think he had a little too much to do in this film. He basically had the Lewis Tully role because they were trying to look for a Lewis Tully character. And the problem with that is I think he kind of dominated the screen time a little bit too much for that kind of character. He was supposed to be the Fire Master. You get it, like the Key Master, the Fire Master. And he had some lineage where he had the power to control fire, which is going to be what was going to be the key aspect of defeating the Frozen Empire ghost. You know, and like I said, I think they could have like cut down on his, you know, role a little bit. It kind of like with the beauty of Rick Moranis in that Lewis role is that he only gets a couple of minutes. He's very funny, and then he kind of like goes off. And this feels more like, I don't know if, you know, they made him too much a key component of the story of the resolution, I think. Anyway, the other aspect we got to talk about quick here before we start to wrap it up is um, this was a contentious thing I seen in a couple of reviews where the character Melody, where she's sort of like a treacherous ghost that befriends Phoebe. She's sort of like a Selena Gomez or something with a Sabrina wig. That's what I thought of. I didn't hate the character, but again, it felt like a lot of time was, yeah, I don't want to say wasted, but a lot of time was spent on this character and her relationship with Phoebe. And I know some were trying to paste woke label over the character. I don't think that's what they were going for. I mean, I think that in this day and age, people are going to read woke messaging into every movie now because we've been so force fed it that it's like, oh, there's two teenage girls talking and playing chess. They must be into each other. The movie doesn't really go out of its way to say that. So I'm going to say that this was just supposed to be a platonic friendship. A lot of other reviewers are saying they just didn't have the guts to, you know, come right out and say it. But like I said, if you paint everything woke when they don't come out and say woke, you know, you're in for a world of hurt. So I mean, to me, it was all right. It wasn't woke. I think just a little too much time was spent in it. And again, her character has, you know, she's sort of like, I felt like she was like the Casper, the friendly ghost. And I think when you're 4 films in, you're allowed to do something a little different. And it felt to me like maybe this was because they kind of opened the door for this with Egon in the last film appearing as a ghost. And of course, he didn't speak, and this ghost talks your ear off. So like we're getting further and further into the mythos of what you can do and can't do in a Ghostbusters movie. And I didn't mind that, but I think that's something you have to be wary of because, you know, going forward, it's called Ghostbusters. You know what I mean? It's not called, you know, Ghost Friends. I don't know. So, you know, I think it was an interesting element for this film. I wouldn't really follow up on that with, you know, some kind of other ghost friends of the Ghostbusters. And the Phoebe character, again, this was my problem with Phoebe was that they put a lot on her, and she's the star of the movie, so I understand that. And I don't mind that they gave her this kind of stuff because they were taking the ghost busting away from her in this film, and she was trying to do whatever she could. And it felt like that was the way to keep her in the story. Also, they made her the only one that could like deal with the frozen ghost. Again, I don't remember what his name was, Gradix or something like that. But I thought in the film the backstory was suggesting that his horns had to come off in order to lose his powers and everything, and that really had nothing to do with it. It was basically because the enclosure that he was trapped in was copper that or brass. She had to make a brass proton pack, and that was kind of like the key, and that's what she was needed for. Another interesting thing is that she becomes a ghost for a few minutes, and that came out of nowhere. And that's kind of the problem with this movie, where there is like a lot of things that just come out of nowhere. And I guess this is one of, again, Winston's technicians have made it so that you can, take your spirit out for a walk for a few minutes. I don't know. And it felt like it came out of nowhere. And I was like, okay, I'll go with this because I guess this is what was needed. But again, the plot kind of demanded a lot of things happen that were, just kind of thrown at you. Uh, Again, I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to give it a shot, but some things just felt like they came out of nowhere. And then, of course, we also have the again, I don't remember this guy's name. The guy who played like the real Ghostbusters Egon, they added another character. A lot of people say they added too many characters. I don't think they added too many characters, but when you have that many characters, they better be justified being in the movie, and they better, do something important. And I felt like this character was important enough to stay in the film. But again, there wasn't enough for him to do that he kind of just goes off at a certain point and not, become relevant at the end of the movie when like all hands are on deck. So and then again and when it comes down to it, it was fun to see the guys all together again in the firehouse, and the ectomobile gets possessed, and that was funny. I think that was something, I think that was in an animated episode. Again, I haven't seen that show in probably 30 years, so I can't say, but that show was good though. It was a good show. I remember watching it every day as a kid. And, it feels like for a while there, they're together. And in order, again, because Phoebe and Nadim had to be like the co-stars to put the ghost away, it really felt like nobody else had a moment to shine in the final analysis, in the final fight, in the last act. And the original Ghostbusters are sort of relegated to background characters. That's something you never want to have happen. I've used this example before, but for instance, in A New Hope, Obi-Wan is supposed to be a very important character. He is supposed to be the most powerful because he's one of the last Jedi. He's like one of the most powerful Jedi. He needed to die in order to let that movie move on, because you'd be saying, well, why is he in the TIE fighter? And why couldn't he beat Vader? And what he had to have like given up the ghost. Otherwise, he looks weak. And that's kind of like what I felt was happening here, where the other Ghostbusters don't get a chance to do anything. The OG Ghostbusters main contribution is going down to the containment unit, which the plot says that it's like overcrowded from 40 years of ghost busting and it can't contain anymore, which there's no real, you know, for lack of a better term, blueprints on the thing. I mean, it's basically the ghosts go into the wall and then they disappear. But they all have to go downstairs and flip the switch in order to trap the ghost baddie into the containment unit. And that's basically all they've got. And that's what I mean. It's like, all right, that's an important thing to do, but do you really want to see the four remaining Ghostbusters from the OG time, flipping a switch in the containment unit? I mean, should they have had some kind of deal to contain the ghosts? I mean, that's kind of where I probably would have preferred to see it flip on its head, where like maybe they were the ones to hold the ghosts with the proton packs, and it was up to maybe Phoebe to find a way to trap that ghost. And again, the Deem had to have something to do in the film. It's basically, like I said, takes away from the OG Ghostbusters. That's kind of what the problem is with the film. The last scene here, we've got they pay off the all through the whole thing. Mr. Gruberston, which I guess is his name, Paul Rudd. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place where he's not really. He's like kind of sort of dating the mom. I don't really know. They don't really let you know anything about their relationship. They kind of were looking like they were dating at the end of the last movie. In the beginning of this movie, it was like, all right, they're kind of a couple, I guess. They go out of their way not to resolve that, but he becomes a co-parent anyway, regardless of what their relationship is. And he can't really like take the authority of being Phoebe's father at the same time. He kind of is Phoebe's father. It's kind of a strange balance that ends up becoming worked out at the end, where Phoebe sort of calls him dad, and then they realize, oh, okay, this is kind of my role. That's what I thought it was, even though it wasn't spoken, but it's cemented now, so it's okay. And the last scene, again, going back to Peck, Mayor Peck, he comes back in the last scene, and the original Ghostbusters are coming out, and it kind of echoes the end of the first movie where everybody's happy and the crowds are all chanting Ghostbusters and this and that. And he's like ready to, throw the book at them and nail them for all their problems they're causing. And basically, Peter, they had such a great relationship in the first film. Peter just calls him a clown. And it's like, you could have had some great dialogue between them two, even if it's only in one scene. But they like held off on them two meeting until the last scene, and there was like nothing else to do but to just make fun of Peck, because again, he's coming in with a bluster, and then everybody's like telling him what a jerk he is. So it's like there was no build up, there was no real payoff to them ever meeting, and that's the thing. I mean, it's kind of like they could have built up something good between the OG Ghostbusters and Peck, and they didn't do any of that. And then Winston sort of just like shames him publicly into saying, "Oh yeah, the Ghostbusters are cool," and like that's about it. But you've like wasted the potential in that character and in those interactions. It's really disappointing. And we get to see Peter again. The other scene I was talking about, where he's like interviewing Nadeem, and he's doing the whole thing with the spaghetti strainer on his head, like Lewis, and throwing the pencils at his face or whatever, sort of like the giving the guy shocks. It's kind of funny that he has got that role, because in Ghostbusters 2, what was suggested was that he was going to be sort of what Ray is doing now, which was being like a podcaster talking about the weird and the mysterious. And of course, in this day and age, it's a podcast. It's not getting some kind of like 11:30 show on some UHF affiliate, which is what I guess Bill, Peter Venkman was getting in Ghostbusters 2. But again, a lot to uncover here. And maybe I was thinking maybe the reason why they didn't want to do the whole Peck and Venkman showdown part 2 was because maybe they were trying to reach for a younger audience. Because the last film, apart from like one like term, I think it wasn't really bad for kids. But in this one, they did kind of like make a painfully a painfully unfunny scene with the joke goes on too long, of like the back of Nadeem's spice rack being where all the fire master's tools are and everything. You'll know when you see it. That was, I think, a little too far. But apart from that, it is the first Ghostbusters movie wasn't really for kids either, so it's kind of hard to like really throw the book at them. But seeing the last film, I thought they were moving more into a family friendly area, but apparently it's still going to be sort of a PG-13. And again, I just feel like it was a wasted opportunity. It wasn't bad. I mean, if you want to look at like, this wasn't Last Jedi levels of bad. It wasn't even The Force Awakens. I think this would be better than that if you wanted to stack them up, because The Force Awakens, I mean, maybe if you want to blame The Force Awakens syndrome on Ghostbusters Afterlife, that might be something, because there's a comparison there. But for a bringing back the old cast type movie, I don't think this is, this is better than The Last Jedi. It's probably better than Dial of Destiny because we're still doing these bringing back the OG cast. So, if you're putting it up against its peers, it's not that bad. I think it's better than them. I think it's probably on par with Creed 2 in terms of a great idea that doesn't get the best execution. They could have really pulled more out of the story if they wanted to. Now, maybe, and I think hopefully we can have a third film in this series, and maybe that's the one that'll really knock it out of the park because we've laid some more groundwork here that the Ghostbusters are here to stay, that, we've got Mayor Peck now. Maybe we can bring him back and do something interesting with him. I don't know. It's all speculative, but I'm giving Ghostbusters Frozen Empire 3.5 stars out of 5. I think it's like I said, it's mid. It's a little bit better than mid. I would give it an 8 out of 10. Yeah, maybe 7.5 stars out of 10 if we want to go by that metric. Um, I guess maybe a B minus. I think I gave Afterlife like a B plus. And I would say it's not really the time to be ranking them because I really need to see this one again. I really need to have this one mull it over a little bit more, but I would probably rank them Ghostbusters in the order they came out, Ghostbusters 1, 2, Afterlife, and this film. So I don't know. I don't know what you do with that. I mean, is that the law of diminishing returns? It's kind of hard to go better than the first two because they're so different. The first two, like I said, are like screwball comedies, and the last two are like family comedies. I don't know. I don't know really know how you compare them. But that's what I think. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you enjoy Ghostbusters Frozen Empire? Do you think, like I thought, it was a good movie that just didn't reach its potential? It could have been better. Hopefully, there's more in the works and they can do something even more entertaining with this cast of characters now that we have them all pretty much cemented in their roles, pretty much grown into their roles, um, pretty much got the tech and the equipment they need up to spec. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And until next we meet, this is Johnnie Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and who you gonna call?